Welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and I'm the apostle for the restoration of the original first century faith. And in this seventh part of Revelation Simplified, we want to talk about trumpet 7, and this is when the kingdom is given to the saints. And trumpet 7 is a major event, and it's a major turning point in the Revelation timeline. So if we take a look at the Revelation timeline, second line down, we've seen in previous slide sets about how the 7 seals represent almost 2,000 years of the 4 horse forces marshaling the nations and the armies of the world, getting them ready for the end time events. Third line down, then there's the 7 trumpets or the 7 shofars, and these represent 7 years of tribulation, with the last 3.5 years being what's called the time of Jacob's trouble. And at the end of that time, at the end of the 7 years of tribulation, at the end of the time of Jacob's trouble, comes trumpet 7. And this is when, effectively, when the Babylonian kingdoms fall, and this is when Yahweh's kingdom begins to be set up. It's a wonderful time. We have to get there. It's going to be difficult to get there, but this is where things finally begin to go in the favor of Yahweh's saints and Yahweh's people Israel. So in Revelation chapter 11 and verse 15, we read, "Then the 7th messenger, the 7th angel sounded." So we hear the 7th trump. "And there were loud voices in heaven saying, 'The kingdoms of this world,'" the Babylonian kingdoms, "'have become the kingdoms of Yahweh and of his Messiah, and he shall reign forever and ever.'" So this is where the Babylonian kingdom falls and Yahweh's people begin to take the reins. So before we can understand how this plays out and what that all means, we need to understand that there's 2 components to the kingdom. There's a physical component, or a physical aspect, we might call it. There's also a spiritual component, or a spiritual aspect of the kingdom. And what's so exciting is that at trumpet 7, this is where the 2 things begin to come together. So if we take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 28, as Samuel said to King Saul or King Shaul, "Yahweh has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today." He's torn the physical kingdom and has given it to a neighbor of yours who's better than you. So we can talk, and we speak in the Nazarene Israel study about how the united monarchy later split into 2 parts, and now we have later became what's called the kingdom of Ephraim, also called the kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah in the south. At this moment in time, both of those kingdoms are one physical kingdom called the united monarchy, or the kingdom of Israel at that point. But he's talking about a physical kingdom. Now notice something different takes place in the 1st century. In Matthew chapter 4 in verse 17, "From that time Yeshua began to preach and say, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.'" So the kingdom of heaven, Yeshua is not talking about the physical kingdom. He's talking about something that's going on spiritually. He's talking about how we can connect with his kingdom, which is a spiritual kingdom, in our hearts through accepting Yeshua. And that's one of the main things his ministry was about in the 1st century. So we go to Luke chapter 17 and verse 20, when Yeshua was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of Elohim would come, because the Pharisees are looking for a physical kingdom. He answered them and said, "The kingdom of Elohim does not come with observation, nor will they say, 'Look here,' or 'Look there,' for indeed the kingdom of Elohim is within you." Now, he's not saying that there isn't a time when the 2 won't come together, because we'll see that there is. He's making a distinction, though, between a physical kingdom and a spiritual kingdom. So going to John chapter 18 and verse 36, Yeshua answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." So Yeshua is being a little cryptic. He's speaking in what King Solomon would call a dark saying of the wise. There will come a time when the 2 come together. But in the 1st century, Yeshua was just here to establish us in his kingdom of heaven, in the kingdom of Elohim. If we go to Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 11, it says, "And I say to you that many will come from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Now, scholars have different concepts, whether we're talking about something taking place in the heavens or what's being discussed here. But verse 12, he says, but the sons of the kingdom, the false kingdom, will be cast out into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And with respect to our Orthodox brothers and sisters, they're attempting to set up a physical kingdom that doesn't have the kingdom of Elohim in their hearts. And that's why they're going to fall. And this is what takes place at Trumpet 7. And we've spoken in past slide sets about King Nebuchadnezzar's dream vision in the statue in Daniel chapter 2. We've spoken about how the rabbinical order was created in Babylon, and this is why we say the rabbinical order is still in Babylon. They're in the head of gold, and this is why the Orthodox Jews they wield so much power and control in the world today, is that they're in the head. We've also spoken about how the Ephraimites or the Josephites are in the 2 feet of iron of Roman-style Christianity that's infused with pockets of Islamic clay, and how this represents the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan and the migrant invasions and this sorts of things, because the 2 feet are the ones that are walking things out. Now, what's exciting about Trumpet 7 is this is when this whole sequence begins to fall, and Yeshua's kingdom begins to replace these sorts of things. So in order to understand this a little better, let's speak a little bit more. Let's go into the prophecies itself. We'll go to Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 31. Daniel is speaking to King Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, representing Babylon. Its chest and arms were of silver, representing Medo-Persia, which is in Iran. Its belly and thighs of bronze, representing Alexander the Great and his Macedonian or Greek Empire. Its legs of iron, representing Rome. Its feet partly of iron, representing Roman Christianity, and partly of clay, which represent Islam. Verse 34, he says, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. So people have different concepts about what the stone represents. We believe it represents Yeshua, which is why it says in Psalm 118 and verse 22, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So we believe this stone represents Yeshua. But when the image gets struck on the feet, it has nothing left to support it. So verse 35 says, then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, because the whole statue is going to come crashing down, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, or a great government, that filled the whole earth. So we're going to talk about what it means that the stone, Yeshua, or in this case Yeshua's body, grows to become a great mountain or a great government that's going to fill the whole earth. And this is why in the Torah government study, we explain how it is, and we'll explain more when we get into it. But there's not really hidden commandments in the renewed covenant, but we have to understand what we're reading. And if we understand what we're reading in the renewed covenant, then we can understand how the renewed covenant shows us or tells us that we're to govern first ourselves, and by extension, we will then govern the rest of the world, because the kingdom is going to be given to the saints. So continuing on in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44. Now there's a lot here in this verse. It says, and in the days of these kings, meaning during the days of the Babylonian reign, the mystery Babylon, the Elohim of heaven will set up a kingdom. This is Yeshua's kingdom, set up in the first century, which shall never be destroyed. So Yeshua's kingdom was set up in the first century, but it has not been destroyed, because it will never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, meaning it's going to be Yeshua's people that are going to rule and reign. It says, it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So it's kind of difficult to believe looking at the state and condition as things are right now, but we believe prophecy, all prophecy will come to pass. So what this is telling us is that we, his saints, are going to rule and reign for him in his stead. We're going to see several more witnesses to that. In order to see them, let's go to Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 13. It says, "And I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, Yeshua, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him, Yeshua, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him." Now notice, Yeshua said his kingdom is not from here, but he's given a kingdom, and this kingdom is on earth, because that's where all peoples, nations, and languages are serving him. It says his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Verse 18, it says, "But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom." So it's Yeshua's kingdom, but the saints of the Most High shall receive it. It says, "And the saints shall possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever." And this is what takes place at trumpet 7. And we'll get into further, as we get further into the end time prophecies, we'll understand how it is that it's we as Yeshua's body that are going to be ruling and reigning here in his stead. So going to verse 19, it says, "Then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast," symbolizing Rome, "which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron," representing Rome, "and its nails of bronze," representing Greece, which is why we call it the Greco-Roman Mystery Babylonian Empire, "which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its 2 feet. And the 10 horns that were on its head," which is so this is the same statue, or the same, it's also describing Rome. The 10 horns could be symbolic of the 10 toes, and the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn, speaking of the papacy, which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows, because the Pope attempts to appear greater than his fellows. And I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, because this is what's happening up until trumpet 7, is basically the beast system has Yeshua's people on the run. And this lasts until verse 22. It says, "Until the Ancient of Days came. And a judgment," there's going to be a heavenly court seated, "and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom." And this is what takes place at trumpet 7. So going to verse 26, it says, "But the court shall be seated, the heavenly court, and shall take away his," referring to the Pope's dominion, take away Rome's dominion, take away Mystery Babylon's dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. And again, this is what takes place at trumpet 7. This is why it's such an exciting event. So go to verse 27. It says, "Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." Now notice, it's very important. So the kingdom and dominion is going to be given to the saints as his body, but that means all peoples shall serve and obey him. So if we understand what this is saying, basically it's saying that Yeshua, his kingdom, is going to strike Babylon on the feet. The statue is going to collapse under its own weight and become like chaff, which is scattered, like the summer, chaff from the summer threshing floor. And Yeshua's kingdom, his body, his ministry is going to go on to become a great government that's going to fill the whole earth. And I realize that's contrary to what a lot of people have been taught, but this is something we're going to see in more slide sets as we continue forward. But we get more witnesses to this. So for example, in Revelation chapter 2, starting in verse 26, Yeshua says, and he who overcomes. Now this is Israel. It's one of the definitions of Israel. He who overcomes with Elohim and keeps my works until the end, meaning we have to be doing the things that Yeshua says to do, not just reading about them. He says, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels, as I also have received from my Father. Now, notice what Yeshua is saying here. He's saying Yeshua receives a rod of iron in Psalms chapter 2. But here he's giving this same rod of iron, which he has received from his Father, to his body, to the saints, so that they can rule and reign in his stead. And as we go through, we're going to see even more witnesses to that. So, coming to Revelation 11 and verse 15, it says, then the seventh messenger sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of Yahweh and of his Messiah, and he shall reign forever and ever, because Yeshua's body is going to rule and reign in his stead. Verse 16 says, and the 24 elders who sat before Elohim on their thrones fell on their faces and worshipped Elohim, saying, we give you thanks, O Yahweh Elohim Almighty, the one who is, and who was, and who is to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. He could have reigned before this, but this was a time of training and testing and trial, so that he can see who it is that is going to keep his works until the end. Continuing in verse 18, the nations were angry, and your wrath has come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, as we saw at seal 5, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Then the temple of Elohim was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple. And there were lightnings, noises, thunderings, an earthquake, and great hail. So this earthquake, again, it's a social quake. It's a societal shakeup. Everything's going to change. Why? Is because Mystery Babylon is fallen, and now the kingdom is being given to the saints. So please join me again for part 8, and we're going to discuss how inset chapters 12, 13, and 14, why they're placed after trumpet 7, and how that is that they tie to trumpet 7. And after that, then we're going to see the 7 cups of judgment, or the 7 bowls of wrath, play out. For more details and for more information, I would encourage you to get a copy of Revelation and the End Times, which you can purchase a copy at our cost from Amazon.com, or you can download a copy for free from NazareneIsrael.org. Shalom.